Campaign 2018 is sponsored by Wisconsin Hospital Association, Wisconsin Counties Association, Wisconsin Realtors Association, Marshfield Clinic, and Campaign 2018 partner Milwaukee Journal Sentinel.
WisconsinEye coverage of the 2018 elections continues. We're at the Green Bay Public Library. We're interviewing Lee Snodgrass of Appleton. She's a Democratic candidate in the 19th Senate District. Lee, thank you for talking to WisconsinEye.
Thank you for having me.
What do you consider the top issues in this race?
I think the top issues in this race are education, healthcare, and frankly, infrastructure, roads.
Let's start with your top priority, education.
Yes.
Do we spend enough money on our K-12 schools in Wisconsin?
We do not, especially in the Fox cities. I mean, I think we need to go back to the original equation, the funding model. I was part of 2 referendums in Appleton that were successfully passed, so we're very pleased about that. But we're in a situation where school districts are continually having to go to the polls to vote to fund schools properly. I know in the Fox cities it used to be around 66, now it's about 55, and I know the statewide average is about 45%. So we're having to make up for about $250 per pupil, where the state used to pick that up.
How would you raise more money to give to our K-12 schools?
Well, I think it's about priorities. I think right now we've spent an awful lot of money sending money to a certain part of the state, $4.5 million at last count, billion dollars, excuse me. And I think it's about shifting where we invest. Public schools have always been the backbone of communities. When you talk to anybody about where they want to live, the first thing that people will ask, especially if they plan to start a family, is how are the schools? And we know that public schools are an economic driver. So I think we need to shift our priorities. We need to shift some of those investments that we're putting elsewhere back into our public schools.
I think you just said you don't support the Foxconn tax incentives. Why?
I don't know. I do not. I think, well, where do I start? There's a number of reasons. Number one, I think we have to remember that, yes, jobs are important and economic growth is important. And I would prefer to invest in Wisconsin corporations. I mean, I live in the paper valley. The crown jewel of Wisconsin is the paper industry. I think if we had been taking some time to invest in the needs of modernizing some of the mills in our area who have been struggling for the last few years, rather than sending that to foreign corporations with no guarantee of results, I'm not sure that we're going to even see a supply chain benefit in our area. I think we have environmental issues that we need to talk about, and I think we need to talk about the fact that taxpayers are going to be paying for something without guarantees 30 years into the future. Their track record is not good. When I talk about interviewing people for a job, I check references, I check backgrounds to see if what they've done before reflects the needs that I have for that employee. And I don't think that we checked Foxconn's references very carefully. I think that there's still a lot of unanswered questions that are going to be problematic.
Another one of your top 3 issues is healthcare. Let's talk about that a bit. What changes would you push for in the area of healthcare in Wisconsin?
Well, I would definitely take the Badger Care expansion. I think we have seen that would provide more coverage at lower costs for a lot of people. So that's definitely something that I would work on. I do think that we also have some gaps in provider care, especially in rural communities. I think we need to look for ways, especially when it comes to mental health, that we're connecting people in those communities. And so underfunding community clinics is not the way to go about making sure people have the resources they need. We need to invest in preventative care so that we can avoid some of these costly health concerns later. I would have to say that at the doors, when I'm talking to people, that's probably one of the #1 things that people talk to me about, is sometimes struggling between paying for recommended labs from their physician or literally their grocery bill that week. And we have to put a stop to that.
Do you think the ultimate answer is a universal healthcare system?
Healthcare is extremely complicated. I think expanding Badger Care would be a start. Okay. Having not been a legislator yet, I'm hesitant to go into sort of the minutiae of that, but I do think that we definitely need to get to a place where we are not profiting off the backs of sick people.
Should state government have a role in retaining and recruiting healthcare providers if they're not available in some areas?
Yes. In fact, I have a friend who's a psychiatrist, and because there's such a demand, he actually spends a good portion of his time in other states because they do not have enough providers. So he actually goes state to state to provide that because these people can't go on vacation. There's nobody to cover their patients when they're gone. So I think we can look for ways collectively to make sure that we are a state where people want to locate and people want to build a practice. And what does that mean? That means strong schools. That means roads that you can drive on. That means economic viability. So I think we need to make sure that we are continuing to find ways to make Wisconsin a place where these people want to locate after they graduate.
The impasse in the Capitol over how to pay for our highways, how would you solve it?
Well, that's $1 million question. I mean, the number one thing that people want is to be able to leave their driveway, drive to work, and not fall into a pothole. I went to 2 dairy breakfasts this past weekend, Winnebago County and Outagamie County, which are both in my district. And I was playing leapfrog on these county roads. I had to, often choose between oncoming traffic and a 1-foot pothole. There's a lot of things that we can do. I would want to make sure that we don't burden the working class. I think, when you talk about things like a gas tax or tolls are a little complicated, there's some restrictions there, a wheel tax. Those are all things that should be part of the discussion. I just would want to make sure that that burden is shared. I know the city of Appleton passed a wheel tax, so that what I like to say is a little pain is shared by many rather than the few. So, I think there's a lot of things that we could talk about.
Should we go back to indexing our gas tax? Because I hear you saying you're not in favor of raising the gas tax. What about indexing it, tying it to inflation?
Nobody likes to pay more. See, that's the thing. When you say, I want to raise taxes, nobody likes to hear that. But the fact of the matter is, money buys things and taxes buy things. And we elect officials to determine what our taxes are going to buy. And I think we've gotten to a point in Wisconsin where most people will be willing to share a little bit more of the cost so that they can have roads to drive on. I also think that the state should stop taking money away from roads and putting into other things. So, I think it's a balance. We don't want to shift that tax burden to working class who are using those roads every day and who already have a limited income. And we want to make sure that the state is prioritizing. And we've seen on both sides of the aisle that priority right now for a lot of people is roads.
Local governments have had to deal with levy limits since about 2006. Local officials say, this is their term, that it's strangling their ability to provide local services. Is it time to dial back or get rid of levy limits?
Well, Winnebago County just voted to go beyond the state levy limit. I know that Outagamie County is coming up against that too. I think that is absolutely true, that we're strangled. And the thing that bothers me most about that, I think, is that oftentimes it's those who have been most fiscally responsible and good stewards of taxpayer money are being punished then by that cap, essentially. And I want to get into a system where, because you've been financially responsible and prudent, you are now not suffering for that responsibility. So, yeah.
The Choice the Voucher program has been expanding in Wisconsin. Started in Milwaukee, then we're seeing now statewide. What's your position on that?
Well, I don't think that Wisconsin should support 2 school systems. I think we have a public school system that our legislators are, they swore an oath to uphold the Wisconsin Constitution, and in that Constitution is to properly fund public schools. And right now, we're taking our taxpayer money and we're funding private schools. Not only are we doing that, we are not holding them to the same transparency, to the same standards of accountability, whether that be for teacher certification or student performance. And if we're going to be taking public money into private schools, we most definitely need to make sure that they're accountable for it. I would prefer that we properly fund the very robust public school system that we have to make sure that they have what they need. I think back to when my daughter started her freshman year of high school. She came home and I kind of looked at the books on the table and I said, why do you have 2 textbooks for your history class? And she said, well, no, that's one. It broke in half, but the teacher told us we can't afford another set for another 3 years. So I just look at what chapter I'm studying and I bring that half of the book back with me every day. So when we're in situations like students are bringing 2 halves of a book because we can't afford them, replacing them in 3 years, then we should not be investing in private schools. We should be putting that money into our public schools so that they can have the resources, so they can have the technology, so that teachers have what they need to do for students to be successful.
UW system funding, we're in the 6th year of a tuition freeze for resident undergrad. Should that freeze be extended into a 7th and an 8th year?
People like to tout the freeze as a great thing. And like I said before, nobody likes to pay more. But the problem that I have with the freeze is that that money has to come from somewhere else. So it's either going to be raising fees in another area, or frankly, it's going to be cutting. And what we've seen with the UW system, referring to our neighboring community of Stevens Point, is that they are cutting a number of classes that are preventing students from either taking the classes that they need to fulfill their major, and they're ending up taking longer to graduate. So I don't see a cost savings when you're freezing tuition if it's going to take somebody an extra semester or even year to graduate. I have a child who just finished her freshman year at the University of Minnesota. I was a very proud graduate of the UW system. I went to UW-Madison, so did her father. And when it came time to look at schools, I felt terrible in that we were encouraging her to look at out-of-state schools because we were not sure that the university she would enter in the UW system as a freshman would be the same university that she was graduating from. I want to invest in Wisconsin. I want to invest in the schools that I was educated in and loved. And it makes me sad that that was not a choice that our family was able to make.
Against the backdrop of mass shootings and school shootings, do we need to change gun laws?
Absolutely. Absolutely, we
How?
need to change gun laws. Well, I mean, I think the latest number was that 97% of gun owners support mandatory background checks. That's an easy one. A 48-hour waiting period, I think, is another one that there's a lot of agreement on. I think we need to remember that gun ownership comes with responsibility, and most people who own guns agree with those two things. So we start with where we can find agreement. Absolutely, needs to change.
The prison system. We're closing the 2 juvenile prisons. The prison in Green Bay and the one in Waupun were built in the 1800s. Do we need a new state prison?
No, I don't believe so. I think we need to spend, think about it. Right now we spend more money on our prison system, our correctional facilities, than we do on the UW system. I think we need to look at how we can reduce recidivism, how we can make sure that we are incarcerating fewer individuals. We need to make sure that we are having good drug and alcohol treatment programs, that we are actually investing in rehabilitation. Even with Act 10, now we have safety issues in the prison. I mean, we need to make sure that our guards are feeling safe and that they can go to their jobs and do the work that they need to do without feeling like they are putting their lives at risk. So I don't think a new prison is the answer. I think making sure that we make sure the outcomes are smarter and that we're investing in those rehabilitation and transition services first.
Part of this debate is the questions over whether to legalize medical marijuana and recreational marijuana. What's your position on both those?
I definitely believe in legalization. I would start definitely with medical legalization. I think we have, I think it's very tied to the opioid crisis. We have a number of people who are in chronic pain. My father recently had a recurrence of his cancer. He's about to go through chemotherapy. Giving those options to people, those compassionate options of a pain relief treatment or symptom relief treatment that works for them would be something that I would definitely think we should start doing.
Okay.
From an economic standpoint, I think then recreational as well. I mean, even the term recreational, I think, conjures up images of teenagers in parks smoking, and that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about ways to bring new industry to Wisconsin that can provide economic benefit. We can legislate it, we can tax it, we can make sure that it's safe, and we can make sure that that money goes back into things like schools and roads.
Your campaign website says one of the reasons you're running is the 19th district needs someone, quote, who knows how hard it is to make ends meet. Can you explain that?
I can. I've been a single parent for over 10 years now. I work full-time. I've often had to take second jobs to make ends meet, whether it be for providing for vacation or lately textbooks for my college-age daughter. I joke a little bit about if you want something done, you give it to a single mom. And to an extent that's true. We're used to looking around and seeing that there are very few resources and finding ways to get it done. As a person who works at a nonprofit, budget stringency is something that I deal with every day, making sure that what we're investing in has the highest return on investment for the most people, and that we're being smart of what we do with our money, that we're being smart. So I do that personally, I do that professionally. I would love to help Wisconsin. And
then finally, do you want to highlight any differences between you and your opponent in the primary August 14th?
Sure. I mean, one thing I would just say is that I think it comes down to making sure that you're going to trust somebody and you can make sure that you understand their values and where they come from. I'm a very much a what you see is what you get person. I'm somebody who does not bend easily. I stand up for people. I have made a a career of standing up for people. And I think we can't ignore the fact that experience doesn't necessarily equate to achievement. And then finally, I would say that, let's not ignore the elephant in the room. I am a female candidate, and women are underrepresented in leadership positions all over the place, and certainly in government. And, when you look at the makeup of the state, it would be nice if the governing body reflected the makeup of the state. So that's an easy one.
Thank you. Lee Snodgrass of Appleton is a Democratic candidate in the 19th Senate District. The primary is August 14th, Lee, thanks for talking to Wisconsin Eye.
Thank you for having me. My pleasure.
Thank you.